I didn't flood their project, at least not directly. But by the time everything was over, a luxury apartment development worth tens of millions of dollars was sitting completely idle, construction equipment parked like abandoned dinosaurs, investors asking questions nobody wanted to answer, and a whole lot of very expensive people suddenly wishing they had handled one small problem differently. That problem happened to be me. Looking back now, it's almost funny, almost. At the time, though, standing ankle-deep in muddy water in what used to be my backyard, I wasn't laughing at all. I live in a little town outside Asheville, North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just a quiet neighborhood tucked against a long, rolling hillside. My house sits lower than most of the properties around it, and honestly, that's never been an issue. Rain comes, rain goes. Water follows gravity. Everybody gets on with their lives. For nearly 12 years, that hill behind my property was just open land. A few trees, patches of tall grass, deer wandering through every now and then. The kind of place people drive past without ever noticing. Then one morning I woke up to the sound of diesel engines. Not one, not two, an entire convoy. I stepped outside with my coffee and saw excavators crawling across the hillside like giant yellow insects. Bulldozers were pushing dirt around. Dump trucks were lined up bumper to bumper. Within a week, the entire landscape looked unrecognizable. Turns out a development company called Summit Ridge Holdings had purchased the land. Their plan was to build 3 luxury apartment buildings overlooking the valley. Now, I wasn't against development. People need places to live. Businesses grow. Towns change. That's life. But there was something about the way they moved in that rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was how quickly everything happened. Maybe it was how nobody bothered introducing themselves to the neighbors. Or maybe it was the attitude. You know the type. The moment somebody gets enough equipment and enough money, they start acting like the laws of nature are just suggestions. A few weeks later, we got our first serious storm. Nothing unusual for western North Carolina. Heavy rain, thunder rolling through the mountains, the kind of weather where you stay inside and watch the trees sway from the safety of your kitchen window. That's exactly what I was doing. Then I noticed something strange. The sound outside wasn't right. Rain has a certain rhythm. This sounded different. Heavier. More focused. Like somebody had turned on a giant faucet. I opened the back door and froze. Water was pouring across my yard. Not trickling. Not pooling. Pouring. A fast-moving stream had carved itself right through the center of my backyard, carrying mud, sticks, and chunks of grass along with it. One of my raised garden beds was already collapsing. Another had disappeared completely beneath brown water. I just stood there for a second, trying to understand what I was looking at. Because this wasn't normal runoff. I'd lived here long enough to know exactly how rain behaved on this property. This was different. This was directed. The next morning, after the storm passed, I grabbed a pair of boots and started walking uphill. The ground was soft and slippery. Fresh tire tracks cut through the mud. The higher I climbed, the more obvious things became. Then I found it. A large plastic drainage pipe sticking out from the edge of the construction site. The pipe wasn't hidden. It wasn't temporary looking. It wasn't broken. It had been deliberately installed. And it was pointed straight at my property. I stood there watching water still trickle out from the previous night's rain. Every drop from that stripped hillside was being funneled directly into my backyard. A few minutes later, I spotted a construction supervisor standing near a trailer office. Mid-40s, reflective vest, clipboard tucked under one arm. The kind of guy who looked permanently annoyed before anyone even spoke to him. "You walked over." "Hey," I said, pointing toward the pipe. "You guys sending all your runoff into my yard now." He glanced up briefly. "Barely." "Oh, that," he said. "Temporary drainage. Temporary drainage that's flooding my property." He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Water's got to go somewhere. For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I waited for the smile, the laugh. Something. Nothing came. He just stood there looking at me, like the conversation was already over. And that was the exact moment this stopped being about water. Because when somebody damages your property, that's one thing. When they look you in the eye and tell you your property is the most convenient place to dump their problem, that's something else entirely. That afternoon, I pulled out my property survey from a filing cabinet I hadn't opened in years. And what I discovered changed everything. What I discovered changed everything. The property markers weren't even close. That drainage pipe wasn't sitting near the boundary line. It wasn't accidentally crossing onto my side by a few inches. The end of the pipe actually extended onto my property and discharged directly onto my land. I checked it 3 times because I couldn't believe somebody would be that careless. Or maybe they weren't careless at all. Maybe they just assumed nobody would notice. That possibility bothered me a lot more. The next morning, I started documenting everything. Photos from every angle, videos showing the water flow, pictures of the destroyed garden beds, measurements, property markers, timestamps. If somebody ever asks me what happened, I want to be able to show them instead of explain it. Funny thing is, most people think gathering evidence feels dramatic. It doesn't. It feels boring. You stand there taking picture after picture wondering if you're wasting your time. Then one day you're grateful you did it. A couple of my neighbors had noticed the flooding too. An older woman named Linda lived across the street. She'd been there even longer than I had. One afternoon, she walked over while I was photographing the damage. "That's from a construction site, isn't it?" she asked. "Looks that way." She shook her head. I told my husband they'd eventually create problems. They stripped all that vegetation off the hill. The water's got nowhere to slow down now. That stuck with me. Nowhere to slow down. Because that's exactly what it looked like. The entire hillside had become a giant slide, and my backyard was the landing zone. A few days later, I checked the weather forecast. Another storm system was moving in, bigger than the first one. Meteorologists were predicting several inches of rain over 48 hours. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the forecast on my phone. Part of me felt frustrated. Part of me felt nervous. But another part of me was waiting, because if the first storm caused that much damage, the second one was going to reveal exactly how serious the problem really was. The rain started just after midnight. By sunrise, the entire sky looked like wet concrete, the kind of gray that seems permanent. Around 10 in the morning, I stepped onto my back porch and immediately knew this was going to be bad. The stream was already back. Only this time, it wasn't a stream. It looked like a river. Water exploded out of that pipe uphill with so much force I could see it from my yard. Mud churned through the flow like chocolate milk. Small rocks bounced across the ground. Entire sections of soil disappeared right in front of me. One of the decorative stone borders I'd installed years earlier simply vanished. Gone, like somebody had erased it. I stood there in the rain, watching months of work wash away. You know what's strange? I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that moment. Anger requires surprise. And by then, there were no surprises left. What I felt instead was clarity, a very calm realization that talking wasn't going to solve this. Because people who create problems for others rarely stop until the consequences become their problem too. That afternoon, I drove back up to the site. Construction continued despite the weather. Equipment moved through the mud. Workers rushed around, trying to stay ahead of the storm. I found the same supervisor standing outside the trailer office. He recognized me immediately. I could tell from the look on his face. The expression people get when they know exactly why you're there. I pointed toward the hill. "My yard's underwater again." He sighed, not concerned, annoyed, like I'd interrupted his lunch. "We're working on it." As soon as we finished grading, "You told me that last week." "It's temporary." There was that word again. Temporary. I don't know why, but hearing it the second time irritated me more than the flooding itself. Maybe because temporary has a funny way of becoming permanent when nobody pushes back. I looked at him for a second. Then I said, "You know that pipe crosses onto my property, right?" That got his attention. Just for a moment. A tiny flicker. Then it disappeared. "We got permits." "That's not what I asked. We're following approved plans." "Are you?" His jaw tightened. The conversation ended right there. No yelling. No threats. Just silence. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. I drove home and made a decision. The next morning I took a day off work and went downtown. The city engineering office sat inside an old government building that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Brown brick, fluorescent lighting, the smell of paper, and air conditioning. Nothing about the place looked powerful. But if you've ever dealt with permits and inspections, you know buildings like that can stop million-dollar projects with a single signature. A woman at the front counter asked if she could help me. I explained the situation and requested the drainage plans for Summit Ridge Holdings. She raised an eyebrow, not dramatically, just enough to suggest she suddenly found my visit interesting. A few minutes later, she handed me a thick folder. I spent nearly an hour reading through engineering drawings I barely understood. Elevation maps, drainage calculations, stormwater management diagrams. Most of it looked like another language. Then I found a section that mattered. The stormwater control plan. I read it twice, then a third time. According to the approved documents, all runoff from the construction site was supposed to remain contained within the project boundaries through a series of retention systems and erosion controls. No discharge onto neighboring properties. No temporary diversion outside approved containment zones. No exceptions. I remember leaning back in that chair and feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole mess started. Relief. Not because the problem was solved, because now I knew I wasn't crazy. The flooding wasn't normal. The pipe wasn't authorized. And most importantly, I wasn't fighting an opinion anymore. I was holding evidence. That afternoon, I organized everything on my dining room table. Photos, videos, survey maps, property records, weather reports, permit documents. The pile kept growing. By evening, it looked less like a homeowner's complaint and more like a legal case. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the city. No emotional language. No dramatic accusations. Just facts, dates, photos, documentation. Then I waited. 3 days later, I heard engines pulling into my driveway. But this time, they weren't construction vehicles. 2 city trucks rolled to a stop outside my house. And the moment I saw the official seals on the doors, I had a feeling somebody up on that hill was about to have a very bad day. And the moment I saw the official seals on the doors, I had a feeling somebody up on that hill was about to have a very bad day. The 2 inspectors stepped out carrying clipboards and wearing the kind of expression that never means good news for whoever they're visiting. One introduced himself as Mark. The other was a woman named Rebecca. Neither wasted time. Can you show us exactly what's been happening? Mark asked. I nodded and led them uphill. The rain had stopped the night before, but the ground was still soaked. Water continued to trickle from the drainage pipe, leaving a muddy trail all the way down toward my backyard. When we reached the pipe, neither inspector said anything right away. They just watched. That's what I remember most. The silence. Because people who know what they're looking at don't rush to fill the air with opinions. Rebecca crouched beside the pipe. Mark studied the slope above it. Then both of them followed the water downhill, step by step, footprint by footprint, until we ended up standing in my backyard. Mud everywhere, destroyed landscaping, exposed roots, the remains of garden beds that had taken me years to build. Rebecca slowly turned around and looked back toward the construction site. Then she said 5 words that completely changed the direction of the story. This is not compliant. That's it. 5 words. No jilling. No drama. No speeches. Just 5 words that probably cost somebody hundreds of thousands of dollars. The inspectors headed straight back uphill. I stayed behind. Not because I wasn't curious. Because I already knew enough. About 20 minutes later, I heard voices carrying down the slope. Not friendly voices. Professional voices. Sharp voices. The kind people use when explanations are no longer working. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Approved plans. Unauthorized discharge. Property boundary. Violation. Corrective action. At one point, I saw Darren standing outside the trailer office. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the shrug. Gone was Mr. Waters gotta go somewhere. Now he looked like a man desperately trying to explain why a problem existed in the first place. About 10 minutes later, Mark walked back toward me. His expression never changed. We're issuing a stop work order. I don't think people realize how devastating those 4 words can be. A stop work order isn't a warning. It's not a suggestion. It's a giant red brake pedal slammed onto an entire project. Every machine stops. Every contractor waits. Every schedule falls apart. Every investor starts asking uncomfortable questions. And every single day costs money. A lot of money. That afternoon, the site went quiet. For the first time in months, there were no excavators moving dirt. No backup alarms. No engines. Just silence. Honestly, it was beautiful. Around 6 that evening, there was a knock on my front door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Darren. Only this wasn't the same Darren. The guy standing on my porch looked 10 years older than the one I'd met a few weeks earlier. His posture was different. His tone was different. Even his smile looked exhausted. "We're removing the pipe," he said. "No greeting. No small talk. Straight to business." I nodded. "Good. The flooding issue should be resolved." Should be. Interesting choice of words. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said something he clearly wasn't expecting. "Removing the pipe doesn't repair my yard." His eyes shifted toward the backyard. I invited him around back. For the first time since all this started, he actually looked at the damage. Really looked at it. The missing soil, the erosion channels, the destroyed landscaping, the uneven ground, the collapsed garden beds. The evidence wasn't sitting inside a folder anymore. It was right in front of him. "This all has to be restored," I said calmly. "No shortcuts. No threats. No anger. Just facts." The same facts I'd been presenting since day one. He stared at the damage for several seconds. Then he nodded, because at that point, he wasn't calculating repair costs anymore. He was calculating delay costs. And those numbers were a lot bigger. 3 days later, the transformation began. The pipe disappeared first. Gone so completely you'd never know it had existed. Then engineers showed up. Actual engineers. Not shortcut engineers. Not temporary solution engineers. Real engineers. Suddenly, retention trenches were being installed. Drainage stone was delivered. Erosion barriers appeared across the hillside. Water diversion systems were constructed exactly where they should have been from the beginning. Watching them work was almost funny, because the solution turned out to be neither impossible nor expensive compared to the size of the project. It simply required effort. And effort had apparently seemed optional until the city got involved. Then came my yard. Truckloads of fresh soil arrived. The grade was restored. Grass was replanted. The garden beds were rebuilt. One worker even asked for old photographs so they could match the original layout. I'll give them credit for that. Once they were forced to do the job properly, they actually did it properly. A week later, the inspectors returned. Same clipboards. Same serious expressions. Same methodical process. They walked the site, inspected the drainage systems, compared everything against the approved plans, checked measurements, reviewed corrections. Then finally, after nearly an hour, Mark signed the paperwork. The stop work order was lifted. Construction resumed. The machines came back. The noise returned. Life moved forward. But something had changed. Not just for them. For me. Every time it rains now, I sometimes look out the kitchen window and watch the water flow into a massive retention basin they've built near the edge of the property. A permanente structure. Concrete walls. Controlled drainage. Engineered containment. Exactly what should have existed from the beginning. And every single time I see it, I think about how all of this started because somebody looked at my backyard and decided it was easier. Easier than following the plan. Easier than spending the money. Easier than doing the work. What they forgot is that easy solutions often become expensive mistakes. The funny thing is, people ask whether I feel bad about what happened. Whether shutting down a project was too extreme. Whether I should have just worked things out privately. Maybe. Maybe not. Here's what I know. I didn't create the problem. I didn't install the pipe. I didn't redirect the water. I didn't ignore the permits. All I did was refuse to absorb the consequences of someone else's shortcut. And honestly, I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Not just with property disputes. With everything. Someone crosses a line. They call it temporary. They call it harmless. They call it no big deal. And little by little they test how much inconvenience you're willing to accept. Sometimes the real decision isn't whether you're right. It's whether you're willing to defend the boundary at all. So now I'm curious. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have gone straight to the city? Would you have hired a lawyer first? Would you have given the developer more time? Or do you think shutting down a multi-million-dollar project over one drainage pipe was going too far? Let me know down in the comments, because I can already hear both sides of that argument. And honestly, that's what makes stories like this interesting. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stick around. Because sometimes the smallest shortcuts end up creating the most expensive lessons.